Welcome to Twilight Fables, where darkness blooms beneath the fairy tale surface. Tonight, we unravel Beauty and the Beast, a twisted tale where love is a trap and roses hold secrets far deadlier than petals and thorns. The village of Valmere had always been a place of quiet shadows, nestled in a valley hemmed in by dense, ancient woods. Its narrow streets wound between crooked houses with moss-stained roofs and soot-blackened chimneys. Smoke curled lazily from hearths, but no light seemed to linger in the windows. For long after sunset, the villagers went about their days with weary eyes, guarded hearts, and the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Belle knew why. For as long as she could remember, the people whispered of the beast's castle that loomed on the hill above the village, a jagged silhouette against a bruised sky, wrapped in thick vines that pulsed like veins, and surrounded by a garden where no flower bloomed except black roses, their petals sharp as blades. They said the beast was cursed, a man twisted into monstrous form by a cruel enchantress, his heart locked away, the castle a prison for souls trapped in the garden's thorny grip. Some said the garden grew wild because it fed on despair, others that each rose was a prisoner's soul, doomed to wither and bleed forever beneath the thorns. Belle had heard the stories, but fear had never touched her like it did the others. Her father was a kind, if aging, merchant, whose eyes still held the sparkle of better days. When he fell ill, the village's shadows deepened, and Belle's hope dimmed. One chill autumn evening, desperate and determined, her father left the village with a promise to return with a gift, a single rose for Belle, a symbol of hope in their bleak world. The path he took wound toward the dark forest and the cursed castle beyond. Days passed without word, and when he finally returned, his hands clutched a single black rose, the petals sharp and cold as obsidian, tipped with thorns like broken glass. But the gift was no blessing. A dark veil had settled over him. His eyes were hollow, his strength drained, and an unnatural silence clung to him like a shroud. The villagers whispered of a curse taken and a price to be paid. The rose was no gift, but a trap. The garden demanded a soul in exchange, and the beast claimed what was owed. The only hope for her father's life was for Belle to take his place, to go to the castle, to the garden, and to the beast. The morning Belle left, the village seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with mist, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. She carried nothing but a small bundle of provisions and the fragile hope that love could overcome the darkest curses. The journey to the castle was a winding path through the forest, the trees arching overhead like guardians or predators. Shadows shifted beneath gnarled branches, and distant howls echoed in the cold air. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself sought to stop her, to turn her back. Hours later, she reached the iron gates, rusted and twisted like the vines that strangled the castle walls. The gates groaned open without a touch, as if welcoming her into a dream from which she might never awaken. Inside, the castle was a labyrinth of stone corridors, lined with crumbling tapestries and shattered glass chandeliers. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and dust, mingled with the faint sweetness of roses long dead. No servant stirred, only the soft echo of her footsteps and the distant drip of water in forgotten halls. From the shadows emerged the beast, towering and terrible, with eyes that gleamed like storm clouds and fur matted with age and sorrow. His voice was a rumble of earth and thunder as he spoke of the curse that bound him, the souls trapped in the garden, and the price love demanded here. "You have come," he said. "The rose your father plucked was never meant to be taken. It holds the souls of those who loved me, and now it demands another." Belle swallowed her fear, her heart pounding. "I will stay," she said, voice steady, "if it means saving him." The beast nodded, the weight of centuries in his gaze. "Then you must learn the garden's truth and the thorns that guard it." Days turned to weeks as Belle wandered the castle and the garden's edge, drawn to the black roses whose petals seemed to pulse with faint, cruel light. At night, the whispers seeped through the walls, lost souls weaving a mournful chorus of hope and despair. Each rose held a prisoner's memory, a sliver of a heart broken by love and cursed to linger in eternal torment. One rose, larger and darker than the rest, throbbed with a rhythm as like a heartbeat. The beast warned her never to touch it, but curiosity and courage burned within Belle. She knew the garden held the key to her father's fate, to the beast's soul, and perhaps to her own salvation. She reached out to the dark rose, petals cold as death, but alive with power. The moment her fingers brushed the bloom, a surge of memories and voices crashed through her mind. Faces of lovers lost, screams drowned in silence, and a hunger so vast it consumed all light. The garden was alive, a creature of thorns and shadows, feeding on love's pain. Belle staggered back, breath ragged. The beast caught her, eyes dark with both fury and sorrow. "You've seen the heart of the curse," he said, "and now it watches you." She nodded, determination blazing. "I will break it. I will save him, and I will save us all." The castle waited, the garden pulsed, and Belle's fate intertwined with the beast's curse, a dance of thorns, shadows, and desperate hope. The silence of the castle was absolute, save for the occasional drip of water somewhere far beyond her hearing. and the rustle of dead leaves drifting in from the garden outside. The tapestry-lined corridors were deserted, the once vibrant threads faded and torn. Belle's heart thrummed in her chest, her thoughts a jumble of fear, hope, and grim resolve. She had little choice but to endure this strange, new existence, for the sake of her father, for the hope of breaking the curse that bound the beast and the garden together in a spiral of darkness. The beast was a constant shadow in her days and nights, a towering presence, both terrifying and tragic. His eyes, despite their wild ferocity, betrayed a profound loneliness and weariness that twisted Belle's heart. His voice was gravel and thunder, heavy with centuries of sorrow and regret. "The garden is not just a place," he said once, as they stood overlooking the thorn-choked grounds from a high tower. "It is a prison and a predator. It traps souls and feeds on love's pain. Each rose holds a memory, a fragment of a broken heart." Belle's fingers curled around the stone balustrade. How did it come to be? This curse, this garden. The beast's gaze darkened. "Long ago, I was a man of pride and cruelty. I spurned love and kindness. An enchantress cursed me, not just in form, but in spirit. The garden grew from my soul's rot, each black rose a prisoner of my past mistakes. Those who loved me became part of it. The curse twisted the garden to trap them, to feed on their hope and despair." Belle swallowed, absorbing the weight of his confession. "And what of me? What will become of me if I stay?" His eyes searched hers. "The garden will try to claim you, as it has the others, but you are different. You still carry hope. If you can withstand its hunger, if you can embrace the thorns without losing yourself, there may be a chance." Days blurred as Belle explored the castle and its surrounds. She found herself drawn to the garden more and more, fascinated by the black roses that shimmered with an unnatural glow under the moonlight. The garden pulsed with a life, both beautiful and terrible, an endless tangle of thorns and shadows. One night, beneath a swollen silver moon, Belle ventured into the garden alone. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and something darker, a living hunger that wrapped around her like a living thing. She reached out to touch a cluster of roses, their petals cold and sharp as obsidian. The moment her fingers brushed the bloom, a rush of voices filled her mind, whispering secrets and warnings, cries of lost souls trapped between life and death. "We are the lost," the voices seemed to say, "the lovers who could not save him, bound by thorns and shadows. We are the price of love's curse." Belle staggered back, breathless and trembling. The garden's power was real, terrifying and relentless. The beast found her as she leaned against a twisted iron gate, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "You touch the heart of the garden," he said quietly, and now it watches you. It will hunger for your soul, piece by piece. Belle met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. I will fight it. I will not become part of the garden's prison. He nodded, a shadow of respect crossing his fierce features. Then you must be strong. The garden's hunger is patient and cruel. As days turned to weeks, Belle felt the slow creeping of the curse within herself. Her skin grew pale. The dark shadows beneath her eyes deepened, and at times a coldness spread through her veins. The castle's silence became a suffocating weight, and the whispers from the garden seemed to follow her everywhere. Yet even as the darkness threatened to consume her, moments of light shone through. The beast, for all his ferocity, revealed glimpses of a man burdened by guilt and longing, a soul desperate for redemption. Their strange companionship grew, a fragile bond forged in the cold halls and thorned gardens. Belle's resolve hardened with each passing day. She would break the curse, or die trying. The nights brought haunting dreams, visions of petals turning to ash, faces of lost lovers twisted in agony, and the endless hunger of the garden that reached for her with sharp thorns and cruel promises. One night, drawn by an irresistible pull, Belle followed the voices deeper into the garden than ever before. The black roses shimmered like stars in the moonlight, their petals moving as if breathing. At the centre of the garden, she found the largest rose of all, a monstrous bloom, throbbing with dark light. The air was electric with magic and sorrow. The garden whispered to her, its voice both beautiful and terrible. Embrace the thorns, child, or be consumed. Belle's heart pounded, but she stood firm. I choose to fight. The castle held its breath. The garden pulsed with dark hunger, and Belle's fate wove tighter with the beast's curse. A tale of love's price, the agony of thorns, and the hope for redemption. In a world swallowed by shadow, the castle had grown colder. Its stone walls, once simply aged and weathered, now seemed to absorb the chill from the encroaching garden outside, spreading it like a slow poison through the halls. Belle moved through the corridors with a cautious grace, the echoes of her footsteps mingling with the faintest whispers that seemed to rise from the shadows themselves. The castle was alive in ways that defied logic, a living entity, pulsing with the twisted magic that bound the beast and the garden. Though the beast was often near, his presence was a turbulent tide, sometimes fierce and distant, other times surprisingly gentle. His eyes, pools of endless sorrow, told stories of a man broken not only in body but in spirit. Belle found herself drawn to those rare glimpses of humanity, the moments when his monstrous facade slipped and the pain beneath shone through. You are stronger than I expected, the beast said one night as they stood in the castle's great hall. The flicker of a dying fire casting long shadows across their faces. But the garden does not forgive weakness. It will take what it needs, piece by piece. Belle met his gaze, her own fierce with determination. I will not give it what it wants. She had begun to understand the history of the curse through the brittle pages of ancient tomes tucked away in the castle's forgotten library. The beast had once been a man of arrogance and cruelty, who had spurned love and kindness. The enchantress's curse had been a punishment for his heartlessness, transforming him into a beast and binding his soul to the garden, a place that fed on love lost and hope betrayed. The garden was no mere collection of flowers, but a living prison, where each black rose held the soul of someone who had loved the beast and been consumed by the curse. Their voices echoed in the wind, a chorus of sorrow and warning. Belle's own reflection in the castle's tarnished mirrors began to shift. Her skin paled, shadows darkened beneath her eyes, and sometimes, in the flickering glass, she caught a glimpse of something not entirely human, driven by a restless hunger for truth. Belle ventured deeper into the garden one moonlit night. The black roses shimmered like stars fallen from the sky, their petals curling like claws. The air was thick with magic and menace, and the whispers rose to a deafening chorus. At the garden's heart lay the largest rose, pulsating with an eerie glow. As Belle reached out to touch it, visions flooded her mind, faces contorted in anguish, screams swallowed by silence, and a hunger that seemed to stretch into eternity. The garden spoke through the voices of the lost. Love here is a cage, a slow unravelling. Embrace it or be consumed. Belle staggered back, breathless and shaken. The garden's hunger was real and relentless. The beast found her by the ancient stone fountain, his expression torn between anger and pain. You have seen too much, he said, voice heavy. The garden will not let you go easily. I must try, Belle replied, for my father, for you, for all of us. Days blurred as the curse edged deeper into Belle's flesh and soul. The shadows beneath her eyes grew darker, her skin colder to the touch. The castle's silence was broken only by the distant cries of the roses, calling her name, pleading, warning. Yet amidst the darkness, Belle found moments of fragile light, the beast's rare smiles, the soft brush of his hand, the whispered stories in the quiet hours, each a lifeline thrown into the abyss. One night, a figure emerged from the garden shadows, a woman draped in petals and thorns, eyes blazing with sorrow and rage. She spoke of sacrifice, of the price love demanded in the garden. The curse can be broken, she said, but only if you can bear the thorns without losing yourself. Belle met her gaze, unwavering. I will pay any price. The figure smiled, a cruel, beautiful smile and vanished into the night. The garden's grip tightened. Belle's body grew colder, the darkness creeping beneath her skin, but her spirit burned fiercely. She was no longer merely a prisoner, but a warrior, fighting against the slow unravelling that threatened to consume her. The castle watched silently. The beast, a tormented guardian, bound by chains of his own making, and beneath the tangled vines and black roses, the deepest secret waited, one that could either shatter the curse or doom them all. The castle's cold stone corridors stretched endlessly before Belle, each step echoing in the oppressive silence like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. The shadows here clung to the walls, thick and heavy, as if the very stones absorbed the sorrow and despair that had accumulated over centuries. The curse that bound the beast and the garden was not simply magic, it was a living, breathing torment that seeped into every corner, every breath, every thought. Belle had felt the first creeping touch of that darkness within herself, a chill beneath her skin, a shadow flickering just beyond her vision. She shivered, clutching her cloak tighter as the air around her grew colder still. She knew the garden was watching, waiting, hungry for the warmth of her soul. Her days were a delicate balance between courage and fear. The beast remained a looming presence, his fierce exterior tempered only by moments of fragile vulnerability. In those moments, Belle glimpsed the man he had once been, the kindness buried beneath layers of pain and rage. One evening, as twilight bled through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colours across the floor, the beast spoke quietly. The garden feeds on hope and despair. It twists love into something cruel, but it also fears what love can do. Belle met his gaze, her voice steady. Then I will be the hope it fears. She spent hours in the ancient library, poring over crumbling manuscripts and faded maps, searching for any clue to break the curse. The castle's history unfolded before her, a tale of pride and punishment, love and loss. The enchantress who had cast the curse was both judge and jailer, binding the beast's soul to the garden in a twisted punishment. Belle learned of the souls trapped in the black roses, their memories etched into the petals like scars. They were prisoners of a love that had failed, their cries a constant echo in the garden's dark heart. One night, drawn by a whispering voice, Belle ventured into the garden's depths. The black roses writhed under the moonlight, their petals sharp and glistening with dew, like shards of glass. The air was thick with magic and menace, the scent of decay mixed with a faint, almost sweet perfume. At the centre of the garden, she found the largest rose, a monstrous bloom, pulsing with a dark light. The garden spoke through it, its voice a siren's call. Embrace the thorns, or be consumed. Belle's heart pounded, but she stepped closer. I will not be consumed. The garden's thorns lashed out, scraping her skin, drawing thin lines of blood that shimmered like ink. Pain and cold flooded through her, but her resolve held firm. She felt the curse pressing closer, a shadow seeking to claim her soul. The beast appeared beside her, his presence a shield against the garden's hunger. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, voice rough with emotion. "But the hardest part is yet to come." Days blurred into nights as Belle struggled against the creeping darkness within. Her reflection grew stranger, her eyes darker, her skin paler, shadows crawling beneath. Yet her spirit remained unbroken. The castle watched silently as love and curse wove a deadly dance. The garden's hunger was patient, cruel, but Belle's heart was fiercer. A figure appeared from the shadows one night, a woman draped in petals and thorns, eyes blazing with sorrow and fury. She spoke of sacrifice and salvation, of the price love demanded in the garden. "The curse can be broken," she said, "but only if you can bear the thorns without losing yourself." Belle met her gaze. "I will pay any price." The woman smiled, a cruel, beautiful smile, and vanished into the night. The battle between light and darkness raged not just in the garden, but within Belle herself. The beast stood by her side, a tormented guardian bound by his own chains. Beneath the tangled vines and black roses, a secret waited, one that could shatter the curse or doom them all. Belle had begun to see the castle not as a place, but as a mind. It had moods, whispers carried through hallways, like passing thoughts, mirrors fogged and cleared in time with her breathing, doors opened for her or closed, seemingly based on her will alone. But beneath it all, a pressure lingered, a presence that waited just beyond comprehension. She no longer dreamed of home. She dreamed of thorns, of cold voices, and of herself standing in the garden, unmoving, lips stained black, hands outstretched, as if beckoning something unspeakable toward her. The beast no longer dined with her every evening. Since the night in the garden, something in him had shifted. He was gentler with her, but distant, avoiding her gaze, as if afraid she'd see something lurking behind his eyes. He didn't roar anymore. He didn't pace. He watched the fire and spoke only when spoken to. "I remember nothing," he said one night, seated in the shadowy corner of the parlour. His claws rested lightly on the velvet armrest, like he feared his own hands. No name, no family. The curse took more than my face. It stole everything. Belle stared into the hearth. "Do you think that's mercy or punishment?" He didn't answer. The longer Belle stayed, the more she began to forget her own reasons for coming. Her father's illness became a faded image. Her past, a blur of ordinary days and ordinary fears, slipped through her like sand. The castle filled the gaps. Its music, its ghosts, its voice, Sometimes she heard the servants again, the whispers behind walls, the shuffling of unseen feet. A teacup rattled to greet her one morning, then rolled away into shadow like a nervous mouse. But the most unsettling presence was her own reflection. One afternoon, as Belle passed a mirror in a little used hallway, she caught her own gaze and froze. Her reflection didn't match her expression. Belle's breath caught. She turned to face the mirror directly. The version of her inside smiled, a slow, sweet smile, and blinked with eyes far too dark. Then it raised one finger and gently pressed it to its lips. Shh! She stumbled away, heart racing, but didn't scream. She knew somehow that screaming would make it worse. When she returned to that hallway later, the mirror was gone. Determined not to lose herself, Belle returned to the library. She buried herself in ancient tomes, searching for anything that might describe a curse like this. She found references to the cradle of roses, a forgotten magical ritual from an older age, spoken of only in whispers and warnings, a way to contain pain, a way to imprison love and grief into something that would outlive the person who felt it. The garden is the cage, she whispered aloud, and the beast, she realized, wasn't the prisoner. He was the jailer. The next evening, Belle asked him directly, "Who did you lose?" The beast tensed, his hands curling. "Don't. You said the garden feeds on despair. You said it twists love. Whose love? Who did you bury in there?" He stood abruptly. The flames in the hearth sputtered. The walls trembled softly, like a breath held too long. Belle didn't flinch. "I have a right to know," she said, quieter. "If I'm to Fozok to fight it, if I'm to survive it, I have to know." The beast turned slowly. His silhouette in the firelight looked more monstrous than ever. "I don't remember her name," he said, "but I remember the sound she made when she wept." Later that night, Belle wandered the castle alone. Her feet carried her without thought until she reached the base of a spiraling staircase she hadn't dared climb before. The air here was thicker, wet. There was a dampness to the walls, and the torches flickered without wind. At the top of the stairs was a wooden door, simple, unlike the rest of the castle, but charred black at the edges, as though fire had tried to swallow it whole and failed. Belle pressed her hand to it. It swung open silently. The room beyond was small, cramped. Dust floated thick in the air. At its centre, on a pedestal, lay a single object, a velvet cushion. Upon it, a withered rose, not black, not red, white, drained of colour, brittle as bone. Belle stepped closer. The petals were dry, but etched with tiny veins of silver, like frost trapped inside a dead flower. She leaned down. Beneath the cushion, etched into the stone of the pedestal, was a name. It had been scratched out repeatedly, as if someone had tried to erase it over and over again, only to return in a rage to carve it back. Blood, old and dry, had dried between the lines. Belle turned and nearly screamed. The beast stood behind her, silent. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice lacked fury. "I had to see," Belle replied. "Is this the first rose?" The beast nodded once. Was it hers? He didn't answer, but she saw the pain in his posture. His chest barely rose. His shoulders hunched like he carried too many memories. Belle reached out and touched the rose. Her fingertip brushed a thorn, no longer sharp, but even dead. It drew blood. The garden's magic stirred. A sudden wave of cold surged through her, and she saw, just for a moment, a face. A girl, long hair, eyes like winter, smiling, and then screaming. Belle reeled back, breath caught in her throat. The beast caught her before she collapsed. "She's the root," he said. The garden grew from her. Belle clutched his arm. "Who was she to you?" "I loved her," he said. "Or I thought I did. When she died, I begged the world to stop. I gave the garden my soul to keep her memory alive." He looked at Belle then, and for the first time, his eyes were human. But it wasn't enough. The garden wanted more. It still does. Belle began to understand. The garden was not simply cursed. It was the curse. It had been born from grief, fed on despair, and now with each petal that bloomed, it whispered promises to those who wandered in. "You can have them back, just bleed a little more." And the beast, whatever man he had once been, had become its caretaker, its puppet, its first believer. The castle trembled the following night. Thunder cracked overhead, though no clouds lingered. A wind stirred the halls, howling like a voice too large for language. Belle stood by her window, staring down at the garden, and saw it move. The black roses parted, and something stepped through. It looked like her. The moonlight spilled across the floor of the west wing, washing the dust-mantled furniture in pale silver. Every shadow seemed longer now, every sound more deliberate. Belle walked with careful steps through the hall that had once echoed with silence, but now whispered her name from unseen corners. Since the day she'd ventured into the greenhouse and found the mound of bones, the castle had begun to change. Or perhaps, she thought grimly, she was simply seeing it for what it had always been. The beast had not come to dinner in 2 days. He hadn't appeared in the library or at the window where he sometimes sat watching the garden rot under the snowless, frozen sky. Belle wasn't sure whether to be concerned or relieved, but as the silence grew longer, heavier, a kind of dread filled the castle like smoke. Tonight, the fireplace in her room refused to light. The wind clawed against her windows, though the trees outside didn't sway. And from somewhere in the bowels of the castle, a sound like distant moaning rose and fell with no discernible source. She left her room with a candle gripped tight in her hand. The mirrors along the hallway reflected her in strange ways. In one, her dress was torn. In another, Her mouth was sewn shut. She tried not to look at them as she passed. The west wing door stood ajar, breathing cold air into the corridor. Belle hesitated. She remembered the first time she'd stepped inside this forbidden place, how everything had been covered in sheets, thick with dust. But now the sheets were gone. The dust had been disturbed. The room beyond was dim, the air heavy with mildew and something metallic. Her candle flame flickered wildly, though there was no draught. "Beast," she whispered. The silence answered her. She pushed the door wider. Inside, the great four-poster bed sagged in the middle, curtains half drawn like wilted petals. On the walls, portraits hung crooked, and many had been slashed across the canvas. Eyes gouged out, mouths torn into screams. Something had happened here. Belle stepped farther in, her slippers muffled against the faded rug. There was a smell, not just mildew, but rot, wet fur, old blood. She followed it past the bed to a heavy iron door, smaller and older than anything else in the castle. Its keyhole was shaped like a curling vine. She knelt and pressed her eye to it. Darkness, then movement. A pair of glowing eyes met hers. Belle gasped and fell back, heart hammering. The door did not open, but the eyes remained, blinking, watching. She fled. The next morning the castle was quieter than ever. The servants, if they could still be called that, had grown strange. The silverware no longer danced. The candelabras would not light without prompting. The clock that once spoke in riddles now simply groaned as it ticked, its hands twisting in the wrong direction. Belle did not speak of what she'd seen in the west wing. She could still feel those eyes in her bones. Instead, she went to the library and found the old books had begun changing. Where once were illustrated fairy tales, now lay volumes of anatomy and transformation, written in languages she couldn't read. Pages were missing. Others had been sewn together with hair. One book bled when she opened it. She pushed it from the table and fled the room. By the time evening fell, Belle was no longer pretending this castle was enchanted. It was cursed. It had teeth. That night, she returned to the greenhouse. The vines had grown thicker, more aggressive. They curled around the iron framework like serpents, their thorns gleaming wetly in the dark. She stepped carefully over the cracked flagstones, moving toward the back, where the mound had been, but the bones were gone. In their place stood a stone pedestal. A bowl sat atop it, filled with water that shimmered like mercury. Her candlelight reflected in its surface, but not her face. Instead, she saw a woman, younger than herself, with hair like copper and eyes like winter frost. The woman stared back, mouthing words Belle couldn't hear. Then the water rippled, the reflection changed, a new face and another. A parade of women, one after another, flickering in and out of the silver water, their expressions twisted in fear, anger, sorrow. Belle watched them all. At last, she saw herself, but her eyes were hollow. She dropped the candle. It snuffed on impact. In the darkness, something slithered past her foot. She ran through the halls blindly, not caring where she ended up. Her breath echoed around her like a storm. The castle groaned with every step, as though it resented her movement. She stopped only when she collided with something massive. Warm fur, the beast. He stood in the dark corridor, taller than she remembered, hunched beneath the ceiling's arches. His breath steamed in the cold air. His eyes, not the kind eyes she had grown used to, burned gold with something primal. "You went back," he growled. Belle took a step back. "To the garden, the wing. You opened what should have remained closed." "Why is this happening?" she whispered. "What is this place?" The beast's lips curled back, revealing rows of two sharp teeth. "You were not supposed to see. Then show me all of it. No more locked doors." He turned from her, his claws scraping the stone. "You think me the monster," he said, "but I was once just a man." "And the curse?" His silence was an answer. He took her down into the crypts. They passed through a hall of statues, each one depicting a woman frozen in terror, mouths open, hands reaching. Belle tried not to look too closely. One of them wore a dress like hers. Far below the castle, a door carved from bone stood sealed with wax and runes. The beast sliced his palm open and pressed it to the sigils. They burned, hissed, and vanished. The door creaked open. Inside was a chamber made of roots. They moved, slowly, curling like worms, feeding on something unseen. In the centre, a rosebush, towering, black as pitch. Its thorns were long as daggers, its petals withered but clinging. The heart of the curse. Belle stepped closer. The bush turned toward her, not the branches, the whole thing. It shifted as though alive, reaching for her. A thorn grazed her cheek. Her skin welled red. Behind her, the beast said, "It feeds on devotion, beauty, hope. Each girl brings a season of peace, but the hunger always returns." She turned to him. "You've done this before?" His silence was shame. "How many?" He would not say. Belle looked again at the rose. A heartbeat pulsed beneath its roots. She dreamed that night of thorns growing from her spine, of her father knocking at the gate, his hands frozen solid, of the mirror showing her mother's corpse, mouth sewn shut with gold thread. When she awoke, her room was covered in petals, black, scentless. She began to understand. She was not meant to break the curse. She was meant to sustain it. A caretaker, a consort, a sacrifice. And the beast, he was simply its vessel. Belle sat at the long dining table, alone. The silverware remained still. The food did not steam. She looked at the chair where the beast usually sat. It was empty, but behind her she heard his footsteps. He no longer bothered to disguise his voice. "You should not have looked." She did not turn. "I had to." The candles went out, one by one. Darkness pressed close, and in the dark, the rose began to bloom. The beast was waiting for her at the garden gate. He stood still, cloaked in the silvery hush of twilight, the trailing edge of sunset, staining the distant trees with blood. The air was heavy, sullen. Wind whispered through the thorn walls in a sibilant hush. His eyes, once glowing dimly like embers in a hearth, now blazed with raw, impossible light. "You were in the east wing," he said. His voice had changed. No longer gravel and wind, but thunder pressing through a narrow throat. Belle's heart clenched. She didn't answer. "You saw the vines," he continued, "the ones that grow from under the nursery floor. You touched the cradle." She didn't try to deny it. "You knew I would." "Yes," the beast said, turning to open the gate. "That's why I let you stay. That's why the house lets you live." The gate swung open, not onto the orchard, but into a corridor of pure darkness. The world beyond it was silent and flat. No wind, no breath of life, no moonlight, just a hushed moor, as though the garden had opened a mouth to swallow her whole. Belle stared at it, then back at the beast. "Where does it go?" He looked at her. "To the heart, to what remains of me." The path through the dark was lined with thorns, not the delicate vines she'd seen in the garden proper, but monstrous growths, their blackened limbs bristling with curving talons. They pulsated faintly, like muscle tissue stretched too thin. With every step, the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest, against her bones. The beast walked ahead, never touching the vines, as though they parted for him naturally. Belle, however, had to move carefully. More than once, a thorn grazed her shoulder or cheek, leaving shallow, stinging cuts that bled sluggishly into the shadows. She could hear things breathing beyond the walls, slow, wet inhalations, low murmurs of something vast, and half asleep. The air carried the scent of sap and rot, of cradles long abandoned, of milk soured in porcelain cups. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked as they descended a staircase that hadn't existed before. The beast did not look back. "Because you want to see, because the house wants you to see, and because it's almost time." "Time for what?" He stopped. They stood at the threshold of a cavern, round and deep as a wound. The walls were lined with thorny veins, and in the centre grew a tree with no leaves, its bark the colour of old flesh. Tangled in its limbs were mirrors, dozens, hundreds, some shattered, some whole. All of them reflected Belle's face, only none of them matched. Some were older, some younger, some twisted or scarred. Some were beautiful in ways she had never been. One smiled, one wept, one screamed silently. "This is the heartwood," the beast said. "It grows from what I cannot forget." Belle turned slowly, unable to tear her eyes from the reflections. "What is this?" The beast placed one clawed hand upon the trunk. The bark peeled back like skin, and inside was a girl, no older than 10, pale, limp, suspended in a web of roots. Her eyes were open and empty. Her mouth was stuffed with rose petals. Her body was wrapped in a lace shroud, embroidered with the same symbols Belle had seen on the nursery door. "My sister," the beast said. Belle stepped back. "You told me you had no family." "I have none left," he said. "I killed them." The story came in pieces, the way broken bones shift under a torn sleeve. There had once been a kingdom, not his, but hers. The girl inside the tree had been a daughter of some small realm to the west, gifted, strange, prone to singing lullabies in forgotten tongues. Their father had married again, and the new queen had been cruel in ways that poisoned everything. The girl had wasted away, bit by bit, until one night she disappeared entirely. The beast had searched for her, gone mad some said, tore through old forests and ruined keeps, and finally found her in the Garden of Thorns, a cursed place that promised what was lost could be preserved if not returned. He made a bargain, one soul for another, one body in exchange for memory. He would become the keeper of the garden. The garden would protect her. She would never age, never rot, never be forgotten. The problem was that gardens grow. The vines did not stop. They spread into his mind, into his bones, into everything he touched. They whispered and he listened, until he no longer remembered why he came, until he became the very thing he tried to escape. "Every guest," he said, his voice breaking, "was a prayer cast into the dirt. Every girl who walked these halls was me begging the garden to show mercy, to wake her up, to let her live." Belle turned away from the mirrors. "And what am I?" "The last," the beast said, "because I can't hold it back much longer." They returned to the house. It was not as they'd left it. Now it pulsed, now it breathed. The doors twisted in their frames. The windows leaked black sap. The curtains no longer fluttered. They twitched like insect wings. And through it all, the thorns grew, across the ceilings, up the walls, through the cracks in the floors. The servants had vanished. No more teacups that giggled, no more mirrors with voices, only the rooms, deeper and darker than before. And the garden outside was no longer green. It had turned red, every rose, every leaf, every blade of grass, red as birth, red as ruin. That night, Belle could not sleep. She sat in her room, watching the mirror as it pulsed with an unnatural glow. The surface no longer reflected her. It showed her the girl in the tree, breathing now, her fingers twitching, her lips parting. No sound came, but Belle could feel the cry in her throat, a rising pressure, a suffocating scream, held just below the surface. Something was waking. The beast stood in the tower, watching the final rose begin to die. It had been beautiful once, this symbol of a curse, of hope, of redemption. Now it was black at the edges, curling inward like paper in a fire. The petals dropped one by one into a pool of blood at its base. He touched the glass. I can't keep her asleep forever. The thorns curled around his legs, around his chest. One pierced his shoulder. He didn't flinch. They were growing inside him now. The next morning, Belle found a note under her pillow. The paper was soft, almost damp. The ink ran in strange, flowering patterns. Come to the ballroom before sunset. Bring the mirror. There was no name, but she recognized the handwriting. The ballroom had changed. The ceiling had cracked wide open, revealing not the sky, but a canopy of writhing branches. The chandelier had become a nest of bones and glowing insects. The floor rippled with roots beneath the tiles. The beast waited at the centre, no longer in his fine coat, but bare, his fur matted with sap and old blood. The horns had grown longer. His face was more mask than creature. You brought it, he said. Belle held up the mirror. Its surface swirled with mist. What do you want me to see? Yourself, he said, but not here. There. He stepped forward and pressed her hand against the mirror, and she fell. It was not a vision. It was a memory. She was small, younger than she'd ever remembered being. Her hands were pale, her hair longer, darker. She was in a nursery, not the one from the East Wing. This one had no windows. There was a cradle. She leaned in. Inside, it was the girl from the Heartwood, but it was Belle's face that looked up, and it opened its mouth and spoke in the beast's voice. Do you remember yet? Belle fell back from the mirror, gasping. Her hand was bleeding where the glass had cut her. The beast stood silently, watching. You brought me here because of her, she whispered. Because I look like her. No, he said. Because you are her. She staggered. That's not... No, I was born in the village. My father... Your father made a deal years ago. A daughter for safety, a memory for a child. He gave her to the garden, and the garden gave him you. Belle shook her head, backing away. That's not true. The thorns began to creep across the ballroom floor. Your name was not always Belle, the beast said. You were the seed the garden planted, the replacement, the memory made flesh. The girl in the mirror smiled. The beast reached out and took Belle's hand. There is still time, he said, to choose. The garden was not quiet. The roses whispered in tongues that sounded like pleading. Thorns twisted in slow motion, reaching for her like skeletal hands. The once grand palace groaned under some ancient weight, a keening breath echoing through its crumbling halls. And in the centre of it all, Beauty stood alone. She had buried the last of her illusions with the broken shell of the beast, not dead, not truly, but drained of whatever human spark the curse had allowed to flicker within him. Now he was only hunger. The garden fed on sorrow, and the beast had become its perfect vessel. She tightened her grip on the shears. The silver blades were warm with memory. Her mother's pruning knife, once used on vines that coiled too tight. Now they were all she had. That and the cloak she had stitched from the remnants of her dreams. She had returned to the west wing, where the rose had once lived under glass. The pedestal was shattered, petals blackened, rotted into the wood, but something pulsed beneath the floor, some buried root system, a heartbeat not her own. The curse wasn't just a spell, it was alive, and it had learned her name. The beast no longer roamed the halls. He was in the walls, in the shadows, in the very marrow of the castle, where once he had trembled at the thought of losing himself. Now he had surrendered to it. The humanity she once coaxed from his eyes had sunk beneath bark and bone, and something old had grown in its place. And it waited. "Come to me, beauty," it whispered through the hedges. "Let me show you what love becomes when it is fed too long." She did not answer. She moved silently, the shears wrapped in cloth, her boots leaving no prints in the soil. She no longer wept. Her tears had been stolen, one by one, every time she kissed a mouth full of fangs and told herself it was kindness. This place had eaten her love. It would not eat her rage. She passed the dining hall, now a graveyard of spoons and shattered porcelain. Candlesticks had long since melted into waxy limbs, twisted into forms that suggested pain. Lumiere's flame had gone out. The candelabra hung from the ceiling like a corpse, arms still flung in a final, theatrical gesture. Mrs. Potts had cracked in half. The tea-stained smile split down the middle. Only the chipped cup remained intact, resting on a windowsill as if watching her pass. They had all faded, not with time, but with something more intimate, a forgetting, a decay of meaning. They were once human, yes, but had clung too long to their roles. They had become symbols. Now they were nothing. She descended the stairs into the heart of the castle. Each step bled. That was not a metaphor. The marble seeped crimson with each tread. The palace had turned inside out. Veins pressed against the stone like cracks. The further she went, the more she felt the roots brushing her ankles, wrapping up her calves like vines seeking warmth. She did not stop. At the base of the stair, she opened the old chapel doors. What lay beyond had once been sacred. The stained glass was shattered. The altar was overgrown, a pulsing mass of rose bushes that breathed in rhythmic gulps, and at the centre of the bloom sat the throne, carved from bone and bark, its occupant waiting. The beast was beautiful now, not in the way he had once been, not in the sad, almost human way. No, now he gleamed. His fur was dark gold, shimmering with thorns. His eyes were blossoms with pupils. His antlers were branches that held corpses instead of leaves, and his voice was silk soaked in honey and venom. "You returned," he said. She stepped into the light, the shears at her side. "I didn't return for you," she answered. His mouth split open, too wide. A smile dragged across his face like a rip in fabric. "You are part of me, beauty. You always were. Every kiss you gave, every promise you made, it fed me, grew me, loved me into this. This isn't love, she said, stepping closer. This is hunger, pretending to be worship. But I was made for you, he whispered. You were meant to fix me, save me. Isn't that what the story said? She stared at him, at the petals that drifted from his mane like ash, at the throne that pulsed with living sorrow, at the roses blooming from the corpses of dreams. Then let's finish the story. She struck. The shears flashed, not toward him, but toward the root beneath his throne. It writhed, screamed, yes, screamed, and the entire chamber groaned, as if the castle itself were in pain. The vines shot forward, catching her wrists, her throat, her waist. But she had expected this. She leaned into the agony. Let the thorns dig in, let them taste her blood. And then, with one last breath, she drove the shears deep into her own chest. The roots paused, and the beast, the garden, the curse, screamed, not out of pain, but surprise. She smiled, blood on her lips. You wanted my love. Take it. Her blood soaked the floor. It was not ordinary blood. It shimmered gold where it touched the roots. It sizzled. It burned. The vines recoiled, smoking. The beast roared, leaping from the throne. But as his claws reached for her, they disintegrated, because the curse was built on longing, on the promise that love could fix the broken. But beauty had turned her love inward, chosen herself in the final moment, and the spell could not hold what it could not own. The chapel collapsed, the roots shriveled, the garden withered, and the beast, he fell piece by piece, not flesh, not bone, but memory. Petals turned to ash, antlers snapped like dry twigs. His eyes dissolved into puddles of colour. His final word was not a roar. It was her name. When she awoke, she lay on the forest floor, not dead, not whole, but real. Her wound had closed, not with skin, but with gold. A thin seam ran down her chest, like the crack in a mended teacup. Around her, the land was quiet. The palace was gone, vanished like a fever dream. The roses did not whisper, the trees did not bleed, and her heart, what was left of it, beat with silence. She stood, walked, and never looked back.